taking your time today. I wanted to kind of pick your brain about how we can help our students become better when it comes to scientific studies, because, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who use that word. You know, I did my research, and I mean, you have people who are scientists and they still don't know how to interpret data, or maybe they cherry pick it, or they do it deliberately, or maybe not. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, especially with personal trainers, I'd be willing to bet well over 99%. You're talking less than 1% of trainers know how to even go through an article or where to go when it comes to finding valid research. And so I want just to pull up real quickly what we discussed or what I sent you, because I think this is.
Yeah, let's give the backstory to all this.
So you got, and here's how I work. So, you know, I've networked with a lot of people going through, you know, credible conventions like the ISSN, I think, and I've, you know, we met a bunch of you guys, and I forget the doc's name, but I forget, I'm totally blanking on his name, but I've followed him and we're friends on Facebook, and then he went down and he introduced me just virtually to Ben House. Are you familiar with Dr. House?
Yeah.
And so he would go down to his like little conventions in Costa Rica. And so I'm thinking, you know, this guy's pretty knowledgeable. Ben House is pretty good. And then recently I came across Metabolic Mike through Ben House. And so Ben House made a couple comments saying, you know, this guy's like legitimate. And so then, you know, I come and you look at this and you see someone has a master's and they're sharing nutrition, metabolism science. Like, that sounds pretty legit. Obviously it's like it's a front to get people to buy in, and you start looking through some of his information just real quickly. It's not terrible. It's like he's talking about obesity and, you know, eat too much fast food. So I didn't dig too much into it. I started to get a little bit weary when he posted this.
That one right there. Yep.
Yep. So I was just, it's funny. I started getting a little weary about this one when he started really attacking fast food, not knowing much about the individual. And, you know, there's so much that goes into it. And so then that's when I sent you the post about, was from not Natural News, Natural Journal. And I was just, you know, asking you about the efficacy of masks, because he posted on there that, you know, masks don't even.
Let's go to that one. Unless you took it down. Let's go to that.
He did. I think he did take it down because it's not on here.
No, really?
So unless it was on one of these. Yeah, because I was looking this morning to there was nothing on here that he had.
Does it go up a little bit? That one. Top
This
right.
one?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. That is it. Yeah, okay, here we go.
Flip through, yep.
Okay, so I didn't miss it. So this was the thing I sent you about respiratory virus shedding and exhaled breath and efficacy of face masks. Because, I mean, that's a pretty big topic right now. And, you know, people are freaking out. They're wearing masks or they're not wearing masks. And first off, it sucks wearing them. But, yeah, I think that you got to look at the bigger picture and, you know, put your self-comfort out of the equation and look at the betterness for the whole entire society. And so, you know, when you post something like this and you kind of start knocking it, and then you're going to get a lot of people who kind of hop on board saying that, you know, this is a knowledgeable guy, and he starts highlighting stuff. In conclusion, both surgical and cotton masks seem to be ineffective in preventing the dissemination of the COVID-19 and cost of patients. And he's essentially, this is confirmation bias to an extent. He's looking for something to confirm what he believes. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that, but also to coach up our interns, because one thing that I really want to separate ourselves as we grow, I think it would be really neat to have a group of trainers who are competent in going through a study and not doing what everyone else does, which is just read the abstract, go to the conclusion, confirm what you're trying to ascertain, and then it's like, oh, I did my research. But were you really even to depict what was going on? So can you just talk to us a little bit more about what you sent me, your thoughts, and how maybe we can prep our students and our interns to be a little better off in the future?
Right. So, yeah, quick disclaimer. I don't study medical science. I study exercise science and sport science. But with that said, go back to the first study that he had up here. So flip over a couple images. One more. Oh,
it's always screwy with here. How you?
Yeah, flip back a post. There we go. So we have his commentary that there's little to no research showing that masks reduce the transmission of respiratory infections, etc. And then we have the front page of a couple studies that he decided to put up. Well, when you sent me this, Nature is a pretty reputable publisher. Their series of journals are peer-reviewed. They're usually pretty highly ranked. It's pretty difficult to publish in a lot of the Nature journals. So I found it a little weird that with all the experts, for the most part, the expert consensus is that if everyone wears a mask, it will reduce the spread. And it does that by slowing down the velocity of water particles, essentially, that you exhale or cough out. So they don't travel as far. Maybe they get caught up in the mask, etc. Anyways, so I found it a little strange that you have this expert consensus and then this study published in Nature that refutes it. So I was really interested to read it. And when I opened up this study and actually read this study, and I sent you the link to it, it essentially had the exact opposite findings and conclusion of what Mike was saying, that cloth masks are ineffective. And it showed that the masks indeed were effective at reducing how much of the aerosols escape through the mask and enter the air and could essentially be breathed in by someone else. And you know, you can just copy and paste this, the title into Google. Why don't you do that? Just copy and paste that title into Google. I don't know, if you might have to type it in. Or just if you have, can I share my screen? Hang on, let me do that. Oh.
Can you?
You might have to enable me to share my screen since you're the host.
So this will be something I'm learning today. So how the hell do I do that?
I don't know.
New share maybe? Can I go to iPhone, share computer sound, optimize screen sharing for video clip, screen. I only have access, I think it's maybe advanced.
Maybe if you go to participants, and then click on my, like where it says more on my name, I might be able to. I don't know.
So participants, more, stop, allow, make host, maybe make you the host. Let's try that.
That might work. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
See if that works.
Host disabled attendees. Okay, there we should work now. Okay, cool. So probably see this PowerPoint I was working on. What was the name of that study?
Let's see.
Wait a second. I can link here. I got it. Never mind.
Okay.
There's the first study. It looks a little different on my screen than it was, but it is the same study. And so when we actually read the paper, we can either download the PDF or we can go right through it. So we can go to the results. And here we have efficacy of surgical masks in reducing respiratory virus shedding in respiratory droplets and aerosols of symptomatic individuals with coronavirus, influenza, and rhino. So several different viruses. And here we have virus copies per sample. And here we have, with the coronavirus, you can see without a mask how much is being spread, and with a mask how much is being spread. And what you can also see is There's a significant difference. The p-value is significant, or borderline significant, I should say. For influenza, it is significant. For rhinovirus, not significant. And then I think what else did I share with you in there? The, oops. From the conclusion of the actual study, our findings indicate that surgical masks can efficaciously reduce the emission of influenza particles into the environment in respiratory droplets, but not aerosols, etc. We also demonstrate them to reduce coronavirus detection in viral copies in large respiratory droplets, aerosols. So essentially, masks are going to reduce whatever you're breathing out.
And when it says an aerosol, is that making reference to the mask itself? What is it? What exactly is the aerosol?
The virus being suspended in the air, essentially.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Again, I don't study this in great detail, but I do know how to read a study and look at the findings, and when they're in direct confliction of what somebody posts, it's a pretty red flag. The other thing he posted was the other study in which it wasn't useful, and here we can see this experiment did not include N95 masks, which really no one except healthcare workers wear, but does not reflect the actual transmission of infection from patients with COVID-19 wearing different types of masks. We do not know whether masks shorten the travel distance of droplets during coughing. So it's pretty inconclusive findings. But the big part of this study I want to bring up is there were only 4 subjects that they studied. And so that is a very, very small sample size when you're trying to conduct research. So anyone who can go on PubMed can really, if they want to, if they're pretty keen about doing a PubMed search, can find a study to cherry pick whatever bias that they want to support. It's not that hard. There's studies out there. Sometimes the abstracts of the studies don't tell the full story. Oftentimes they don't. Sometimes you just be like Metabolic Mike and leave out everything else and put up a study thinking that people aren't going to follow up on it to look at the results.
And so here's something that I challenged. I'm always coming up with ways to challenge our interns to become better, and I'm a big advocate of reading more. I think people they take the easy way out with social media. They'll look at a meme and then they're going to say that's like my research. And so I try to read a book a week, but for our internship page, I challenged them. We started a 30-day challenge beginning today of reading a study per day, of which I'm going to help coach them. And now I'll do one where I'll post it and we'll go dissect it. But especially, I mean, I'm sure that you see a lot of this as a professor. With the society today, it's very immediate gratification. And we want, essentially, they've done even studies looking at like Instagram and how long people will read a post. Dr. Russin, if you're familiar with him, he's a physical therapist. And he's like a mastermind behind the marketing and stuff. And he has teams that will go through it. And that's why you'll notice most of his posts are no longer than 2 to 3 sentences, because the attention span of people aren't going to do that. So I understand why he's playing into it. But how do you coach people to, like, hey, read this esoteric vernacular for a lot of people? I mean, this makes perfect sense to you. I can dissect a little bit of it, but for the person who's never been taught how to read this stuff, at least when I was going through my bachelor's of science, that was part of one of my classes in kinesiology, to read a study. I remember it was a biomechanics teacher. She gave us one study, and she gave us a week. I'm like, why are you giving us a week? That's way too long. And the first day, I wanted to cry. I'm like, I didn't understand a single word, and and all these numbers, and you're talking about p-values, and so it's like they have classes. I'm pretty sure that teach you how to read studies, correct?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of undergrad programs are starting to incorporate those types of classes.
And so for a new trainer who, you got to remember the entry standards are, you get a NASM ACE simple textbook, you read it, you take the 120 questionnaire, and all of a sudden you're a certified personal trainer. They don't teach you how to go through studies and read them. And so that's something that I want to separate ourselves to get our students more inclined to at least feel comfortable reading it and not be like the average person that will say they do their research, they read the abstract, find their conclusion that gives them confirmation. And so what would be some pointers for someone who's real green to start getting into reading studies? Are there some that maybe, and just on a side off, are you familiar with Chris Beardsley?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on people like him in the sense where I like, because it's almost like a Cliff's Notes of the study, but to play the devil's advocate, do you feel like that's enabling people not to do their due diligence and read the complete thing?
I think he puts out great infographics. They're very easy to digest, and there's always a reference to whatever study he's looking at, so you can go back and follow it up. The thing is, like, if you were to follow the references on every single study of everything, there's just not enough time in a person's life to do that. And so this is where, and also I should back up and state that one single study is not the end-all be-all of a particular topic or question. And you guys are still able to see my screen?
Yeah.
So I gave this presentation a little while ago about supplements and how to evaluate them. And a very good question to ask is, when you're looking at a study, and this can relate to really anything, what population has it been studied in? Because what is effective in one population will not always be effective in another population. For example, we'll just talk about increasing muscular strength. And if you take somebody off the street who's sedentary, who does absolutely no resistance training, you can increase the strength of their legs just by having them cycle. Cycling for a couple months, you'll see an increase in muscular strength. However, if you take someone who has been resistance training, who has developed a considerable amount of muscle mass and strength, cycling is not going to make them stronger. The dose of training necessary to cause adaptations in athletes is much different from general population, much different from the elderly, etc. So number one, when you're evaluating the claims made by someone, or the ability to translate a study to whatever population or whoever you're working with, is what population has it been studied in? So that's the first question to ask yourself when you're reading a study. Second is, was the study, or were the studies you're looking at, were they well controlled? For example, when we're evaluating supplements, the gold standard is a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. Even better if it is what's called a crossover study, where each participant takes both the placebo and the supplement at different time frames, but definitely a placebo-controlled study. When you're evaluating training studies, some important aspects to look at when we're looking at resistance training is, was volume equated, and was the intensity equated? if it's, you know, if you're looking at some sort of outcome, say the difference between machines and free weights, were as many variables equated and controlled as possible so that you can, with a high level of confidence, state that the independent variable, the particular variable that was being studied, was responsible for most of the differences seen, if any differences were seen. So were the studies well controlled? You can look at diet, especially in training studies. What type of dietary restrictions or controls were put in place? In terms of just looking at like acute studies, what type of dietary controls were put in place? If you take a group of people and you allow them to eat whatever they want before training, and some people show up having consumed a balanced breakfast and others can show up fasted, you're going to see a difference in between those two groups of people. And it may not be due to the particular independent variable that you're studying. Maybe you were studying like the effect of foam rolling on performance or something like that. With that in mind also, what time of day was the training carried out at, the exercise test carried out at? Did they account for diurnal rhythms in that regards? So there's a variety of factors to take into consideration in terms of the control. Next is, were the results statistically significant and were they meaningful? A lot of times, especially with supplement marketing, is the manufacturers will claim, well, you know, this supplement improved performance. What they won't tell you is that it improved performance, but the increase in performance was no different than the increase in performance that was seen in the placebo. So let's say you have people and you have one group taking the placebo, one group taking the supplement, and they train for 10 weeks. And at the end of 10 weeks, you reevaluate muscular strength and body composition, and you see improvements. But there's no difference between placebo and supplement. So you can conclude that the supplement had no additive effect. So that's one thing to consider, is were the results statistically significant in the right direction? And were they meaningful? You might see some an improvement in performance that is statistically significant, but it might not be meaningful. And here's a great slide that I'll show you with regards to beta-alanine. So beta-alanine over the course of 4 to 10 weeks, you'll see about a 2.5% improvement in performance. In one study, they reported in a simulated 2,000-meter row a 2.9 second improvement in trained rowers. Now, keep in mind, it takes, for at the very highest level, someone to complete a 2,000-meter row in about 6 minutes and 45 seconds. This is at the Olympic level. So for an average individual that might complete it in 10 seconds, does a 2.9 second improvement, does that mean anything to you? To an Olympic rower, yeah, it could be the difference between first and last. But to the average individual, it might mean nothing. So were the results, were they significant, and were they meaningful? And then most importantly, have these findings been replicated elsewhere? If they have not, if it's just one study that shows a benefit and all the other studies show no benefit at all, then you can conclude with a high degree of confidence that there was something in that study that didn't show a benefit that confounded the results. Maybe it was the population, maybe it was the control, maybe it wasn't a high enough sample size, maybe it was only 4 people.
Are there numbers, like you said, that was kind of a red flag? And what people don't realize, if you've never been part of the academia and looked in, like I remember I was fascinated when I was at UConn, I was like a blood runner. So I would go get the, you know, the athletes would have, not not a needle, but they'd have a little thing hanging out of them. The professors would take blood out, they'd give it to me, I'd run it down, they'd do a centrifuge and all this stuff. And so I got to be part of a pretty significant process. But I don't think people realize how much it costs to do studies. And then you get a bunch of people who will chime in and say, oh, well, it's backed by that group. And so then they'll automatically say that it's not reliable. And so it's, oh, you know, they, for the big Monsanto or whoever, they support it, therefore that the studies they don't count. And so can you talk a little bit more about maybe some red flags that would present themselves, like you were discussing earlier about the number of people, or if it is who's backing it and what that degree goes to?
Yeah. Well, with most clinical trials, they have to pre-register clinicaltrials.gov before they start conducting the study. And so what this provides you with is, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, you can go look at the methods that they pre-registered that they were going to do, and then see what they reported. So it could be that that they didn't report all their results, and that would be a red flag. So let's just take a very crude, made-up example, right? Everyone likes to rally against big pharma or whatever funding agency it is. So let's say that you are studying an antidepressant, and it's registered in clinicaltrials.gov, and there are, let's say, 10 outcome measures, maybe 5 measures related to safety, maybe 5 measures related to some sort of psychological outcome. The study is concluded, it's published, and only 4 outcome measures are reported. And so that would be a red flag right there. If they took these 10 measures, why did they only report 4 of them? Now, it's not always a red flag, because sometimes one big study will be divided into 2 papers. You might report the psychological outcomes in one paper, and you might report the safety outcomes in another paper. However, time goes on, and you know, those outcomes aren't reported. That could be a red flag. Now, it could be that whatever tools they were using to measure them failed, so that the findings weren't valid. You're not going to report invalid findings, or it could be something malicious and suspicious. Nearly every study that's conducted needs to be funded, for the most part, especially if you're doing any sort of medical research and anything that involves taking blood or tissue samples. The costs to run blood analyses are not cheap. And so universities aren't going to give you the money to do that. As a professor, you're expected to find someone to give you the money to conduct those studies, whether that is the government through the National Institute of Health or National Science Foundation, whatever, or private industry, which is much more common in regards to supplement research. So just because the supplement was funded by some industry or some company study, sorry, not the supplement, doesn't mean that the results are automatically valid. Really, it's up to you to look at the methodology and the results, and then also how the authors discuss their results, and make a conclusion yourself of whether it was valid or not. So sometimes, usually the most fun parts of the paper to read, especially for non-scientists, are the introduction and the discussion. And the methods and the results are incredibly dry, incredibly boring to read, pretty difficult. You probably found it kind of painful, especially as an undergrad, trying to read the methods and the results.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
but
a lot of those, if you don't have a background in statistics or something, you just see all these numbers. You're like, what the hell am I looking at?
Yeah, or the tools being used, the techniques, etc. But those are probably the most important parts of the paper to read. especially if you're a personal trainer, especially looking at the methods and the results, because sometimes the authors discuss those results and their discussion of them and what they say about it doesn't always match up with what was actually found.
And so I'm trying to think of, I get asked all the time, like, what are some books you suggest for personal trainers to be successful, motivation? I'm not too familiar with, at least in personal training world, is there like maybe it's something that I need to interview some people and come up with that, but a commandments list of almost like, these are the top 10 studies that you should start out looking at. You know, I like to make reference to Eric Cressy and the 10-week unstable surface training, because that kind of debunks everything that NASM does. That's one of my favorite. But are you familiar with much out there when it comes to like the fitness world, where this would be like a great place to start out learning and going through some of these studies?
Yes, actually, yes. So if we look at is my screen still up?
Yep.
All right. Maybe you have seen this pyramid here.
With meta-analysis being the top, the most important, or?
Yeah, if we look at like the hierarchy of evidence, I just want to show the image. Sorry, here we go. This will work. Can you see this okay here?
Yeah.
All right. So at the very top of the pyramid, you have essentially meta-analyses of randomized control trials, as well as systematic reviews, because sometimes meta-analyses aren't always available. Essentially, what these are is they are either a quantitative or scientifically valid qualitative assessment of all the studies that have been done on that topic up to that point of time. So remember I said if if you're, let's say, you can cherry pick anything. Let's say I want to say resistance training doesn't make you stronger. I could probably find a study on PubMed where resistance training didn't result in an increase in strength for whatever reason. And I can highlight a little conclusion from the results or the abstract or whatever, post it on social media, and yeah. Well, we know that's not the case, and to be thorough about it, we can look for meta-analyses and systematic reviews that do show that resistance training as a whole improves strength, and to what extent it does that. So this would be the top tier, and I would suggest that when you are interested in a topic related to fitness, and you want to be evidence-based about it, that you start out there with either meta-analyses or systematic reviews or even position stands. Position stands are great too. The ISSN has a number of position stands they've put out on various supplements and diets. NSCA has theirs, ACSM has some as well. So something to that extent. Below that would be a well-designed randomized controlled trial. Below that would be a controlled trial without randomization. That's more of an observational study. And then going down and down and down, we have, case studies and user reports and opinions of authorities or reports of expert committees, things like that.
I always like because I've seen Alan Aragon and like Schoenfeld, they'll post some and they'll make like a joke one where at the very top it'll be like a random guy on social media.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so one thing you can do if you're interested in a topic, go to pubmed.gov and you can put your topic into the search. So let's just pick a topic.
Do you want like very specific or?
Whatever.
So let's look at a common misconception, or you hear a lot about sugars being addictive.
Okay. And so what we can do is we can filter by article type. And we're going to go Meta-Analyses and see what comes up.
Got alcohol.
Yeah. Let's look at systematic reviews.
Alcohol. Took some other pharmaceuticals.
Okay. Let's just look at reviews then. There we go. So now we have a few reviews. In these reviews will be a number of citations. Just click on this one. It's a little. Now what's nice is that it's a free full text article. And so this would be a really good place to start if you want to learn about sugar addiction. If you want to go deeper into it, then you can follow up on some of the references that are at the end. One other thing to look at is, you said the conflict of interest. So here you would see if these individuals had any sort of funding. So maybe if you saw that they were funded by the National Cane Sugar Growers Association, that might throw up a bit of a red flag.
Okay, sounds great. I think what I want to do for the interns is kind of go through some of the more popular ones that people lambaste and start looking at more of the science behind that, because I think the big ones that I hear a lot are the sugar's addictive. I hear a lot with the organics better. And just to kind of teach them, it's not to say that I'm all for sugar or that I'm against organic. That's where I think people get their emotion involved. It's like, leave your emotion. That's science. They don't talk, scientists, you guys are nerds. You guys don't have emotions. You guys, and you guys just care about the final answer. And that's what's so great is you can, for the most part, you can have an educated conversation and you're trying to come to a conclusion that's for the well-being of science. And then there's bad apples out there. And I think that's important to recognize. And unfortunately, what people will do is then they're going to put just because there's one bad apple, everyone's a bad apple. And so it's, this little project that I want to start doing that I think will kind of separate us from other associations that, I love picking on NASM, but I don't see them doing much for their body of clients and customers other than they get this next certification. And, I like to keep it simple, but if we can focus on anatomy and movement and really understanding that aspect, the psychological aspect with training your clients, but beginning to feel comfortable going through a study and putting some of that information out there, because I think that can be really valuable and be a big wave to change the industry. Because unfortunately, as people think that you're knowledgeable because of followers, they think you're knowledgeable because you have a six-pack, or what you get some nerdy people who are really confident and they use big words. And you're like, shit, I don't know what the hell they just said. So they said this p-value is wrong, and I don't know what the fuck a p-value is. So therefore, this guy must be right.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to keep on picking your brain, and maybe even once or twice a month we can go through a famous study, or start looking at some of the stuff that's out there to help the students see what the actual evidence says behind it, and to kind of go down that rabbit hole in a fun way.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I just want to leave you with a closing thought. And people will often say, especially in some pretty highly contested scientific topics that the experts disagree, so therefore this isn't valid. This expert consensus isn't valid because the experts disagree. We see it a lot with like climate change and certain things in nutrition, etc.
Can I just say one thing real quickly about that? Like I remember watching, someone sent me from Dr. Ludwig, the San Francisco professor who's real big into like sugar will kill you. And so he wrote a book about that, and you get a lot of these doctors who write books, and if you listen to his talk, you're like, holy shit, if you have any ounce or just even a gram of sugar, you're basically gonna die, because he gets into all these pathways and everything. And it's like, I feel for the general population, because I'm not that smart. I can get a couple words like, oh, I kind of got that. But if you're just a lay person or a journalist, you're just going to take that information and really run away with it and make it wreak havoc.
Yeah, well, journalists are the worst. You can't fault them. Like they're trying to put out a product that people will consume, and people want to consume some flashy headline. But I'm going to grab my board really quick. And
I think we got to make these part of every single lesson, because I love it when you get your board out.
So let's say that, hopefully the glare is not too bad.
No, you're good.
Let's say that we have this topic, right? And here is the whole of the topic. And you have, like, this isn't even a good 2%. So I guess 2% is going to be more like that.
Can you move it down just slightly for the glare? A little bit more?
How's that?
Yeah, that's better. There you go.
All right. So we have this topic, right? Whatever it is. And you have this 98% consensus. And then you have this very small people that disagree, of scientists, experts, whatever. Oftentimes, this 2% is the loudest. Now, within this 98% agreement, they don't agree on everything to the finest detail. So let's, for example, talk about strength training, because that's what I study. This is what I can talk about in great detail. So as far as exercise scientists go, 98, 99, 99.5%, whatever, a very significant portion of exercise scientists will say that strength training, resistance training is necessary to get bigger and stronger. And then you have a couple loud whack jobs that say it's bad for you and you shouldn't do it, right? Fair enough. Now, within this 98%, we don't all disagree on the best way. We don't all agree on the best way to get bigger and stronger. We all agree that you should lift weights or do some sort of external resistance. However, what rep range to use, periodization, protein consumption, things like this, these little fine intricacies, we might disagree, and we might have some really, really heated debates at scientific conferences or on social media. Do you know Jeremy, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Linecky is?
Yep. He's an Auburn guy, right?
What's that?
Where is he from? Auburn, or he's from one of the big...
He's down at he's at Ole Miss. And
that's right. Yeah.
At Oklahoma with Takashi Abe.
Big into blood flow restriction training, right?
Yeah, big blood flow restriction training guy. He's done a lot of the seminal work in blood flow restriction training. Anyways, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, we had a pretty intense debate on social media about periodization. So we disagree about the usefulness and the efficacy of periodization in increasing muscle mass and strength. Now, someone looking in from the inside out, looking in from the outside might say, oh, well, these two individuals, these two scientists disagree about periodization. So strength training, we don't even know if strength training works. Scientists don't agree that strength training makes you bigger and stronger, blah, blah, blah. No, we're debating like the fine details of it. And so unfortunately, yeah, the experts disagree, but we disagree on very small details of a particular topic. And it's that way for nearly all facets of the field of science, from biology to psychology to exercise science to medicine, etc.
And then at least I think with sports scientists, you have this going for you. Because for the most, I mean, again, generally speaking, I mean, you're in great shape, you work out. What people will then use is you get like this giant, you get just pretend like Arnold's back to being 20, and he's just absolutely fucking massive. People will then say like, well, I'm bigger than you, therefore you're a scientist, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's why I love citing certain individuals like Wallaby. And I'm like, this guy, I love him because he's like a battle toad, but he's smart as shit, and he has a cool ass accent. So it's like, and he's humble as awesome. So it's like, you have to listen to him. But then you're going to have some people that are maybe a little shorter or fat, and then people will kind of harp at him and be like, well, they must not know what they're talking about because they don't look like Adonis. And so you have these personal little jabs people have, but I think that this is awesome information, and I really want to keep on going down the rabbit hole in the future when we have more of these, and maybe we can text back and forth and some entry stuff that would be good for the interns to dissect. And as we go through, I'll send you my little challenge that we're doing, but I'm trying to get them to read a study a day just to get them more comfortable talking about actual research and not just reading a post on someone's page. So again, I really appreciate you taking your time today, and you should have a bottle of wine coming your way here pretty soon.
Oh, sweet. Thank you.
I don't know if you got, hopefully the hurricane didn't take it away.
Yeah, right.
What do you got going the rest of the day?
We're going to go to the gym, and then